the martyr of this day is of the period after the Edict of Milan, because we know that there was a short period of persecution again under the famous Julian, who saw that the empire was losing power, and he blamed it on Christianity, because he thought the Roman gods were not being honored anymore. And so he started to reinstate the pagan gods and therefore to persecute Christians. Julian the Apostate, who died with these words, "Tu vicisti Galileae," you have conquered Galilean. And so it was that after that Christianity grew and multiplied without obstacle for a while. But this then was one of the victims, Bibiana, around 363, a virgin martyr. Now, in these memorials, the Church proposes this gospel which I have read to you, and indicates the way in which these virgins gave all for one hidden gem. Margarita is a jewel. It's actually Greek, but it comes into Latin and into our languages as well. And it is, each time we hear that word, a reminder of this great army who gave all, and in the case of these virgin martyrs, all for Christ the spouse. At the end of the world, that same gospel reminds us, along with the saints, will be fished out by the angels evil men. This is something not often directly alluded to. It's, as it were, not politically correct. But if one counts up the number of teachings on this point given by the Lord himself, who, remember, knew far better than we did what he was talking about, it's a high proportion, and therefore it's an essential part of his teaching. And remember now, mercy has no sense if hell does not exist. It's precisely because that really is what we deserve, even from Adam onwards. We are coming into a game in which the odds are against us. Why? We know why. Lucifer and all his band, about a third of the angels, therefore an astronomical number, is against us and trying all the time to get us. As you know, God sometimes speaks to us through secondary causes. On a daily basis, it can be that somebody comes in our direction and puts in our hand a CD, a DVD, or a book. This happened the other day, and I am glad, because it, for a while, excludes all other thought and puts us there, in that beyond. This I've mentioned before, it's Mariasimma, but this morning something else came to me, which I haven't brought with me, but which I can sum up in a few words. It was somebody who had cut out of the Irish Daily Mail, I believe, this fairly long and extensive article about a gentleman, actually a Hindu, who had had an experience of death. I won't go into detail, but it's interesting because of the one who's giving it. himself in the job of accompanying people into an operation and putting them to sleep with high-powered anesthetics and keeping them asleep next to the surgeons. And so when he was in trouble himself and went under the knife, he knew what to expect. But what was his surprise when what he had dismissed in all the cases that had come back to him with this similar story, he actually met himself. He was well educated and balanced, and he was courteous but essentially dismissive to those who came back with a story. Well, he found himself looking down and listening even to the coarse joke that was being made by the person there in his shoes, and reminded him of what he'd said when he came to. And so he also copped on. But what is interesting is that this gentleman had something which is pretty universal. He moved on, and then he saw also his state. Now we're talking here not specifically about anything Christian or dogmatic. It's essential human existence and the state of the soul. Therefore, do you see why this gospel concerns every inhabitant of the human race? We can't get away from the issue. 1, the soul goes on. It does not extinguish itself. 2, this bit comes up. He saw his whole life, and he saw where he was heading and why. He was very successful. His wife was a dentist and had her own practice. They were doing very well. He was doing very well in his profession. They were getting big cars and big houses. He was a success. Oh? What was his surprise when he found that his soul was not at all a success, and the consequences facing it? And of course, he was being judged by what he knew, and he knew perfectly well. Little details he'd quite forgotten came back to the surface. E.g., how in his professional competence he was, yes, dismissive. A person might come in genuine need and pain and wanting his attention, and he would not even look at that person but make a prescription. He was efficient in his job. We don't see what the Lord sees until it's too late. Now, with regard to this moment in time, it concerns us. Why? Because Advent operates on 2 levels: the immediate preparation, but also the preparation for the great coming Advent of the Judge. And I want to leave you one little thought today which concerns us all. None of us here is going to avoid one issue in the innings of life. There's one common denominator. We must suffer. We can't avoid pain. Physical and spiritual, emotional, and all that comes in the form of stress and worry. It's pain. Now, I want to leave you with this message, which has come back precisely from somebody who didn't see its value. It happened like this. Now, remember now, this is compared with these martyrs that we're feasting, how they used suffering gloriously. There was a young lassie and a priest. They found themselves in the same hospital, and they were both seriously ill. They were able to have contact through the circumstances of the hospital ward And this conversation took place between them. The little lassie told the priest that she was asking one grace of the Lord, to be able to suffer upon earth all that might be necessary so as to, what? Go directly to paradise. Now she knew what pain meant, she was in there, but she wanted it, rather like the martyrs. Pain can be your hidden gem, your margarita. You might be called to be a victim soul with no other ministry upon earth but to suffer well. The priest listened. Now he was a priest and knew what pain was. He had a lot to do with souls. And he answered, he did not dare to make that prayer. A third person happened to be present and to overhear this conversation. It was actually a nun. The lassie died. And then, and only then, the priest. But to the nun who had heard this conversation, the priest appeared after his death and had this to say: had I but had the faith of that girl, I too would have gone straight